My name is Emma Collins, and I'm 29 years old. There I was, standing in my tiny 450 square foot apartment while my family circled the space with barely concealed smirks. The room filled with whispers and side glances, but a burning determination settled in my chest. Not a single word of encouragement came from any of them. Only judgment and disappointment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. As my cousin Vanessa ran her finger along my windowsill checking for dust, my phone lit up. A message from the building manager. Miss Collins, paperwork for the East Wing renovation needs your signature. Congratulations on the acquisition. Below it, 27 missed calls from various contractors. My stomach fluttered with secret satisfaction, but I kept my expression neutral. They had no idea who they were really mocking. To understand why my own family couldn't see past appearances, I need to take you back to the beginning. I grew up in an affluent suburban household in Connecticut with my parents Gregory and Diane Collins, and my younger brother Blake. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family with our luxury cars, sprawling mansion, and annual trips to exotic destinations. But behind our imported mahogany doors, I always felt like the financial disappointment of the family. Blake was 4 years younger than me, but he might as well have been wearing a crown from the day he was born. With his natural business instinct, charismatic personality, and willingness to follow in our father's investment banking footsteps, he was the golden child everyone admired. He landed a six-figure job right out of college, drove a Mercedes at 22, and had the penthouse apartment everyone envied. I was never jealous of his success or wealth. What hurt was how differently our parents treated our career choices. Dad, I got accepted into the Urban Planning and Sustainable Development program, I announced one evening during my senior year of college, clutching the acceptance letter. Dad glanced up briefly from his financial reports. That's nice, honey. Not much money in that, though, is there? He returned to his papers with a dismissive shrug. But when Blake declared he'd been offered an entry-level position at our father's firm that same month, our parents took us all out for a celebratory dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. They ordered champagne and toasted to the future of Collins Investments. I sat quietly sipping water, wondering why my achievement warranted nothing more than a passing acknowledgement. This was not an isolated incident, it was the pattern of my life. I excelled in environmental studies, urban planning, and sustainable architecture, earning scholarships and recognition from professors. But my achievements were always overshadowed by whatever financial milestone Blake was reaching. My parents missed my graduate school graduation ceremony because Blake was closing his first major investment deal that day. You understand, right? This is really important for his career, Mom explained when I expressed my disappointment. I did understand, but that didn't make it hurt any less to sit alone at my graduation with no family to cheer when they called my name. By the time I finished my master's degree, I had accepted my place in the family hierarchy. I stopped sharing my small victories, knowing conversations would inevitably shift to Blake's latest bonus or property acquisition. I built my own life, made friends who valued what I brought to the table, and focused on my education and future career in sustainable urban development. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My final year of graduate school, when I graduated with highest honors in sustainable architecture and urban planning, my parents promised they would attend the ceremony. I reserved 4 seats in the auditorium, 2 for them, 1 for Blake, and 1 for my best friend Rachel. The morning of graduation, I received a text from my mother. Blake's investment in that tech startup is going public today. We need to be at the celebration. So proud of you, though. Take pictures. Only Rachel's seat was filled that day. Rachel became the family I chose. We met during undergrad orientation and connected immediately. She was studying finance, ironically the field my parents wished I'd pursue, but she possessed none of the elitist attitudes that permeated my family's social circle. After graduation, we both found jobs in Boston and shared an apartment for 3 years. She witnessed my struggles with my family firsthand, holding me through tears after particularly difficult holiday gatherings or unanswered phone calls on my birthday. Your worth isn't measured by your bank account, she would remind me. You're changing the world one sustainable building at a time. That matters more than any investment portfolio. Her unwavering belief in me kept me going on the darkest days. I met Daniel Foster at a community development conference when I was 27. He was moderating a panel on affordable housing initiatives, tall with thoughtful green eyes and a passion for urban renewal that matched my own. On our second date, I found myself telling him about my family situation, expecting the usual uncomfortable response I typically received when sharing these stories. Instead, Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. That's not just sad, Emma. That's fundamentally wrong. A person's value isn't determined by their income or status. What you're doing, creating sustainable, livable spaces for communities, that's work that will outlast any investment portfolio. No one had ever validated my feelings so directly before. For years, I had wondered if I was just being overly sensitive or jealous for wanting more acknowledgement from my family. Daniel helped me see that my pain was legitimate, and the dynamics in my family were genuinely unhealthy. As our relationship grew serious, Daniel encouraged me to set boundaries with my family. You can't change them, he would say, but you can change how you respond to them. He suggested I speak with a therapist, which I eventually did. Dr. Reynolds helped me understand the concept of familial financial trauma and how it had shaped my self-worth and relationships. I began practicing what Dr. Reynolds called detachment with love, acknowledging my family's limitations while protecting my emotional well-being. I stopped trying to earn their approval and focused instead on building a life that aligned with my values rather than their expectations. It was painful but liberating. Daniel became my rock, my champion, and my safe harbor. His family welcomed me warmly from the first time we visited them in their modest but loving home in western Massachusetts. His mother, Karen, called me regularly just to chat. His father, James, sent me articles about innovative green building projects he thought might interest me. His brother, Michael, became the sibling relationship I had always wished for with Blake. You're part of our family now, Karen told me during my third visit. In this family, we celebrate everyone's unique path. I cried in the guest bathroom that night, overwhelmed by the simple kindness that felt so foreign to me. With therapy, Daniel's support, and my own determination, I had made peace with the fact that my family might never value my career choices or life path. I promised myself I would stop measuring my worth by their standards and create happiness on my own terms. I would build a meaningful career doing work I believed in, surround myself with people who appreciated me, and break this cycle if I ever had children of my own. What my family didn't know, what I had deliberately kept from them, was that my career had taken an unexpected and remarkably successful turn when I was approached by an ethical investment group focused on sustainable urban renewal. The firm had been impressed by my master's thesis on transforming abandoned industrial spaces into affordable, environmentally conscious community hubs. They offered me a position combining my expertise in sustainable architecture with strategic investment in undervalued urban properties. While my salary was modest by my family's standards, the real opportunity came in partnership stakes in the properties we developed. I started small, investing my savings in a rundown apartment building in an overlooked Boston neighborhood. Living frugally and pouring every spare dollar into renovations that emphasized sustainability and community spaces, I slowly transformed the building while maintaining affordable rents for existing tenants. That one building became 2, then 5, then an entire block. Each property increased in value as the neighborhoods revitalized. But unlike typical gentrification, we ensured original residents could remain through rent control programs and community ownership initiatives. My work was profiled in several urban planning journals, and our model began to be replicated in other cities. Of course, my family knew none of this. To them, I was still the disappointment working some vague government planning job and living in a tiny apartment. I had stopped trying to explain my career years ago when their eyes would glaze over at terms like sustainable development and, quote, community-centered design. I'd given up mentioning my accomplishments when they'd inevitably respond with something like, "That's nice, honey, but is there any real money in that?" The truth was, there was money. Quite a lot of it. But it was invested back into communities and buildings rather than displayed through luxury cars or designer clothes. My net worth existed on paper and in property deeds, rather than in obvious status symbols. And frankly, I preferred it that way. My work was making a tangible difference in people's lives, while aligning with my environmental values. The fact that it was also becoming financially rewarding was a welcome bonus, but not my primary motivation. I chose to live in one of my smallest properties, a modest building in a transitioning neighborhood where I occupied a tiny but efficiently designed studio apartment. I lived there partly to understand the tenant experience firsthand and partly because I simply didn't need more space. The building itself had been my most recent acquisition, and I was in the process of gradually upgrading it with sustainable features while ensuring it remained affordable for the existing residents, many of whom were elderly or young families. Which brings me back to that fateful day when my family decided to make a surprise visit to Boston. Blake had business in the city, and my parents decided to join him for a weekend trip. "We thought we'd finally see where you're living these days," my mother announced over the phone. "Blake has meetings until 3, but we could come by afterward." Despite my misgivings, I agreed. Perhaps it was time they saw my life for what it was, modest in appearance but rich in purpose. I didn't bother cleaning excessively or pretending to be something I wasn't. This was my reality, and for the first time I wasn't ashamed of it. They arrived at precisely 3:30 p.m., dressed as if they were attending a country club luncheon rather than visiting their daughter's apartment. My mother's eyes widened as she took in the narrow hallway leading to my unit, her hand clutching her designer purse a little tighter as we passed an elderly neighbor watering plants in the corridor. "This is where you live?" my father asked as I unlocked my door, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment. The 450 square feet of my studio apartment seemed to shrink further as they stepped inside, their expensive perfumes and colognes overwhelming the small space. "It's actually really efficient," I explained, showing them how the Murphy bed folded into the wall, how the kitchen table doubled as a desk, how the storage solutions maximized every inch. And the building is gradually being updated with sustainable features: solar panels, gray water recycling, community garden on the roof. Blake wandered to the window, looking out at the ordinary street view. "How much do you pay for this charming place?" The emphasis he placed on charming made it clear he meant the opposite. "It's affordable," I answered simply, not taking the bait. "Emma, dear," my mother interjected, perching cautiously on the edge of my small sofa as if afraid it might soil her designer outfit. "You know your father and I would be happy to help you find something more suitable. Perhaps in a better neighborhood?" "This neighborhood is actually up and coming," I replied. "There's a strong sense of community here. People know each other, look out for one another." My father scoffed. "Community doesn't pay the bills, Emma." "At your age, Blake already owned his first luxury condo." "Different paths, Dad," I said, working to keep my voice even. "I'm doing meaningful work that aligns with my values." "Values don't build retirement accounts," he countered with a dismissive wave of his hand. As they continued to scrutinize my living space, making thinly veiled comments about my modest lifestyle choices and exchanging knowing glances, my phone buzzed repeatedly. I glanced down to see messages from contractors, the property management team, and my business partners about various projects underway across the city. Ironically, one message concerned the purchase agreement for a historic building just 2 blocks from Blake's luxury downtown office. When my mother discovered my bathroom didn't have a soaking tub, "How do you possibly relax, dear?" And my father noted the lack of a doorman. "Is this area even safe?" I felt a familiar sense of inadequacy creeping in. But then I remembered something Daniel always said. "Your worth isn't determined by square footage or zip codes." Taking a deep breath, I decided this was the moment to gently shift the narrative. Not to boast or prove anything, but simply to stand in my truth. "Would you like to see the roof garden?" I asked. "It's one of the features I'm most proud of implementing." They followed me reluctantly up the stairs, my mother complaining about the lack of elevator. When we emerged onto the rooftop, however, even they couldn't hide their surprise. What had once been barren tar paper was now a thriving green space with raised vegetable beds, seating areas made from reclaimed materials, solar panels angled to catch maximum sunlight, and a small greenhouse where children from the building were learning about growing food. "You implemented this?" my father asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "I designed it, worked with the contractors, and secured the funding." I confirmed. "It reduces the building's carbon footprint, provides fresh produce for tenants, creates community gathering space, and actually increases the property value." As we stood there, an elderly resident named Mrs. Rodriguez came up to water her tomato plants. "Miss Collins," she called warmly, "those new rainwater collectors you installed are working beautifully. My vegetables have never looked better." "I'm glad to hear it, Mrs. Rodriguez," I replied with a genuine smile. "Oh, these are my parents and my brother." "Oh." Mrs. Rodriguez beamed at them. "You must be so proud of your daughter. What she's done for this building, for all her buildings. It's remarkable. We can actually afford to stay in our homes because of her work. My grandson is even learning about environmental science because of the program she started here." My family exchanged confused glances. "All her buildings?" my brother asked. Mrs. Rodriguez looked equally confused. "Well, yes, all the properties she owns and manages through her company. This one, the renovated factory on Tremont that's now mixed-use apartments and small business incubators. The old bank building, she transformed into affordable artist lofts while preserving the historical architecture." She trailed off, noticing their stunned expressions. "Oh my, did I say something wrong?" The silence that fell over the rooftop was deafening. My mother's perfectly manicured hand flew to her pearl necklace while my father's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. Blake's expression transformed from smug superiority to stunned disbelief in seconds. "Emma owns this building?" my father finally managed, his voice higher than usual. Mrs. Rodriguez looked from my family to me, suddenly understanding the situation. With a knowing smile, she patted my arm. "I'll leave you folks to talk. Don't forget the community meeting tomorrow about the playground renovation, Miss Collins." She shuffled away, leaving me to face my family's shock alone. I took a deep breath. This wasn't how I'd planned to reveal my success, but perhaps it was perfect timing after all. Yes, I own this building, and several others throughout the city. But I'm with the... How? Blake sputtered, the brother who had never been at a loss for words now struggling to form a coherent sentence. I gestured for them to sit at one of the reclaimed wood tables I'd commissioned from a local craftsman who lived in the building. "Let's talk." As we settled into our seats, with the community garden surrounding us and the Boston skyline stretching out beyond, I explained how the sustainable urban development firm had approached me after reading my master's thesis, how I'd started with one small investment and leveraged it into a portfolio of properties, and how I'd built a business model that prioritized both environmental sustainability and community preservation. "But this apartment, it's so small," my mother interjected, still struggling to reconcile my living situation with what she was hearing. "I live here by choice, Mom. I believe in experiencing firsthand what my tenants experience. It helps me make better decisions as a property owner. And honestly, I don't need more space. I'd rather invest the money back into the communities and buildings." My father, always the businessman, had begun to calculate in his head. "How many properties are we talking about exactly?" 17 buildings currently, with 3 more acquisitions in process, including, I added with a small smile, the Harrington building on Commonwealth Avenue. Blake's head snapped up. "The historical building near my office? The one that sold for 8 figures last month?" I nodded. "We're converting it to mixed use, retail on the ground floor, offices focused on environmental startups on the middle floors, and residential on the top 3 floors. All with state-of-the-art sustainable features while preserving the historical facade and interior details." "But that's a multi-million-dollar project," my father said, his voice faint. "Yes, my company manages about $43 million in assets now." I stated it plainly, not to boast, but simply as fact. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for mine across the table. "Emma, why didn't you tell us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with years of dismissal and oversight. I considered deflecting, but decided that honesty was the only path forward if anything was going to change between us. Because you never asked, Mom. You never showed interest in my work or my life choices. When I tried to share my accomplishments in sustainable design or community planning, the conversation always shifted back to Blake's investments or Dad's business deals. My father's face flushed. That's not fair, Emma. We always supported your education. Financially, yes, I acknowledged, and I'm grateful for that privilege. But you never supported my vision or my values. You made it clear that success only counted if it came with a certain lifestyle, certain status symbols. I chose a different path. Blake, unusually quiet, finally spoke. I always thought you were just idealistic, unwilling to face the real world of business. I couldn't help but laugh at that. The real world is changing, Blake. Sustainable investment is outperforming traditional models in many sectors now. What I'm doing isn't just idealism, it's good business that happens to align with my values. I pulled out my phone and showed them the portfolio report my financial team had sent that morning. The growth curves and projections spoke for themselves. My father studied the screen, his expression shifting from skepticism to grudging respect. These returns are impressive, he admitted. But if you're doing this well, why live like this? He gestured vaguely at my building. Because wealth isn't just about what you have, it's about what you do with it, I explained. I could buy a penthouse tomorrow if I wanted to. But I'd rather create housing security for 30 families. I'd rather build community gardens and playgrounds. I'd rather install solar panels that will reduce carbon emissions for decades to come. My mother looked around the rooftop with new eyes, taking in the thriving garden, the children's area, the solar installation. I never realized, she murmured. You never asked, I repeated gently. The community door opened and Daniel emerged onto the roof, carrying a stack of blueprints. He stopped short when he saw my family gathered around the table. Oh, I didn't realize you had company, he said, coming to stand beside me. You must be the Collins family. I'm Daniel Foster, Emma's partner, both professionally and personally. My father stood to shake his hand, studying him with new interest. You work with Emma on these properties? Daniel smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. I contribute, but this is all Emma's vision. I was working in traditional urban planning when we met, but she showed me how to combine profitable development with genuine social and environmental impact. She's revolutionizing how urban renewal happens in this city. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and I felt a warmth spread through me. This was what support looked like. Not measuring success by square footage or bank balances, but by recognizing the value in one's vision and work. My family stayed for dinner, which we had in the community room on the ground floor. I'd had it renovated first thing after purchasing the building, transforming a neglected storage area into a bright, welcoming space where residents could gather. That night, as happens often in our building, dinner became a community affair. Mrs. Rodriguez brought her famous empanadas. The young couple from 3B contributed a fresh salad with vegetables from the roof garden. The retired teacher from 4A brought homemade bread, still warm, from the oven. My parents and Blake watched in astonishment as neighbors came and went, everyone greeting me by name, many stopping to thank me for specific improvements to the building or to update me on community initiatives I'd helped fund. Children ran about freely, respectfully monitored by all the adults present. An impromptu music session broke out when Mr. Diaz brought down his guitar, and soon the room was filled with song and laughter. This is not what I expected, my mother confessed quietly as we sat together, watching the scene unfold. What did you expect? I asked. She hesitated. I don't know. When you talked about community development, I pictured something more theoretical. Paperwork and zoning meetings. Not this. She gestured to the vibrant gathering around us. This is why I do what I do, Mom. Buildings aren't just investments or assets. They're homes, communities, the foundation for people's lives and relationships. When you develop property with that understanding, the financial returns actually follow naturally. As the evening wound down, I gave my family a proper tour of the building, pointing out the energy-efficient systems, the shared workspaces for residents who worked from home, the childcare cooperative parents had organized, and the small library of shared books and resources. And you've implemented these kinds of features in all your properties? My father asked, clearly reassessing his understanding of my work. With variations based on each community's specific needs, yes. Every building has its own character and requirements. My job is to enhance what's already there, not impose some generic luxury model that prices out existing residents. By the time we returned to my small apartment, I could sense a shift in my family's perception. They looked around the efficient space with new understanding, seeing not deprivation but deliberate choice. "I think I owe you an apology, Emma," my father said finally, sitting heavily on my sofa. "I've been measuring your success by the wrong metrics." "We all have," my mother added, tears welling in her eyes. "We were so focused on traditional markers of achievement that we completely missed what you were actually building." Blake nodded, uncharacteristically humble. "My downtown condo suddenly seems empty compared to what you've created here." Their words were validating, but I'd learned enough in therapy not to base my self-worth on their approval. I appreciate that. But I want to be clear. I didn't do all this to prove anything to you. I did it because it's meaningful work that aligns with my values. The fact that it's also become financially successful is a bonus, not the point. My father looked startled, then thoughtful. "That might be the most important lesson here," he mused. "You succeeded because you pursued purpose, not just profit." "Exactly," Daniel interjected. "Emma's model works precisely because it prioritizes long-term sustainability, environmental, social, and yes, financial, over short-term gains. It's actually the more intelligent business approach for the future economy." As they prepared to leave, my mother hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry we haven't really seen you until now," she whispered. "It's never too late to start," I replied, returning her embrace. After they left, Daniel and I sat on my small balcony, watching the city lights twinkle against the darkening sky. "That went better than expected," he observed. I leaned against his shoulder, processing the events of the day. "It's strange. For years I wanted them to recognize my work, to validate my choices, but somewhere along the way I stopped needing that validation." "That's called growth," Daniel smiled, kissing the top of my head. "You built your own measuring stick instead of using theirs. Still, it feels good, them finally seeing what I've been doing all these years." "Of course it does. Family recognition matters, even when we're secure in our choices. The difference is now it's a nice addition to your life, not the foundation of your self-worth." The following week brought surprising developments. My father called to ask if he could visit one of my other properties, not to critique, but to understand my business model better. My mother started volunteering at the community garden program I'd established across several buildings. Even Blake reached out, asking if I would consider collaborating on a new investment fund focused on sustainable development. I approached these overtures cautiously, protective of the boundaries I'd worked hard to establish. But I also recognized an opportunity for genuine change and connection. Perhaps my family would never fully embrace all my values, but a door had opened for mutual respect that hadn't existed before. 3 months later, I found myself presenting my business model at my father's investment firm, not seeking their funding, but offering insight into sustainable urban development as an emerging market. The room of suited executives listened with increasing interest as I laid out the financial, social, and environmental returns of my approach. "The bottom line," I concluded, "is that development without displacement isn't just ethically sound, it's economically sustainable. When you preserve community infrastructure while upgrading environmental systems, property values increase without triggering the negative effects of gentrification. Everyone benefits: investors, residents, and the planet." The questions afterward were thoughtful and engaged. My father, sitting in the back of the room, looked on with an expression I'd never seen directed at me before, pride unmixed with criticism or qualification. As the crowd dispersed, he approached with Blake beside him. "You've given us a lot to think about," my father said. "Your brother and I have been discussing a potential partnership." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued but wary. "What kind of partnership?" Blake stepped forward. "Your expertise in sustainable development, combined with our capital and investor network." We could scale your model citywide, maybe even regionally, making a bigger impact while still honoring your core principles. I'd need complete assurance that existing communities would be protected. I cautioned. This isn't about luxury conversions or maximizing short-term returns. We understand that now, my father assured me. Your results speak for themselves. You've proven that ethical development can also be profitable development. We want to learn from you, not change your approach. I promised to consider their proposal, making it clear that Daniel and I would need to thoroughly review any potential collaboration. As I left the gleaming office tower where my brother and father spent their days, I reflected on the irony of the situation. After years of feeling inadequate in their eyes, they were now coming to me as the expert, the innovator. That evening, as Daniel and I discussed the potential partnership over dinner in our community room, now a weekly tradition where residents gathered to share food and conversation, Mrs. Rodriguez sat down beside me. "Your family wants to work with you on your buildings now?" she asked, having overheard snippets of our conversation. I nodded. It seems they finally see value in what I've been doing. She patted my hand, her eyes wise behind her glasses. "Just remember, Nina, you built all this when they couldn't see its worth. Don't let them change what makes it special." "I won't," I promised, looking around at the diverse group of neighbors sharing meals and stories. This is the real success, not the property values or investment returns, but this community, the connections, the security people feel in their homes. Daniel raised his glass in a small toast to measuring success by the right metrics. I clinked my glass against his, filled with a quiet certainty that had nothing to do with square footage, bank balances, or my family's newly discovered approval. True wealth, I had learned, exists in the spaces between people, in community bonds, in purposeful work, in environments that nurture rather than extract. My tiny apartment might have once seemed like a symbol of failure to my status-conscious family, but it had become the heart of something far more valuable than any luxury condo could offer. A demonstration that another way of developing our cities is possible, that profit and purpose can align, that success can be measured by the lives improved rather than merely the wealth accumulated. As I looked around at the thriving community we'd built together, residents of different ages, backgrounds, and income levels sharing space and support, I felt rich beyond measure, not because I owned the building, but because I had found my purpose within it. Creating spaces where people could truly belong, where sustainability wasn't just an amenity but a foundation, where success was defined by thriving communities rather than individual wealth. The journey from feeling like my family's disappointment to standing firmly in my own success hadn't been easy. It had required me to question inherited definitions of achievement, to build my own metrics for a life well lived, and ultimately to create physical spaces that embodied these values. The fact that my family now recognized the value in my work was gratifying, but no longer necessary for my sense of self-worth. I had built something meaningful, both in the physical world of buildings and communities, and in the internal landscape of my own values and confidence. And that, I realized, was the true measure of success. Not in having to prove your worth to others, but in creating something that proves its worth through the positive difference it makes in people's lives. 6 months after my family's surprising visit to my apartment building, I found myself standing in the lobby of City Hall, clutching a portfolio of designs and environmental impact reports. The mayor's office had requested a meeting to discuss expanding my sustainable development model into a citywide initiative for revitalizing neglected neighborhoods without displacing existing residents. "Ms. Collins?" A smartly dressed aide approached. "The committee is ready for you now." I nodded, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. This wasn't just another presentation or property acquisition. If approved, this initiative would transform my individual efforts into policy that could affect thousands of lives across the city. As I entered the conference room, I was surprised to see my father and Blake sitting among the committee members. They had mentioned becoming more involved in civic development initiatives, but I hadn't expected them here today. "Emma," the mayor greeted me warmly, "we're excited to hear your proposal. Your work in sustainable urban renewal has become something of a case study in how to revitalize neighborhoods while protecting their character and affordability." For the next hour, I outlined my vision, a public-private partnership that would create a fund for purchasing distressed properties, renovating them with green technology, establishing community land trusts to ensure long-term affordability, and providing existing residents with opportunities for ownership stakes. I explained how this approach could simultaneously address housing insecurity, reduce urban carbon footprints, create jobs in green construction, and build more resilient communities. When I finished, the questions were thoughtful and engaged, focusing on implementation details rather than questioning the fundamental approach. My father and Blake remained professionally neutral during the formal discussion, but I caught the small nods of approval as I addressed the financial projections and return on investment calculations. After the meeting concluded with tentative approval to move forward, my father approached as I gathered my materials. "That was impressive, Emma," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that still felt new between us. "You've thought of angles the traditional developers in that room never would have considered." "Thanks, Dad," I replied, still adjusting to this new dynamic where he spoke to me as a professional peer rather than a disappointed parent. "I actually have news," he continued. "After seeing your work up close these past few months, I've decided to establish a new division at Collins Investments focused exclusively on sustainable development projects. I'd like you to consult on its formation." I studied his face, looking for any hint of the old patronizing attitude, but found only genuine respect. "As a paid consultant with decision-making authority?" I clarified, having learned the importance of establishing clear boundaries. He chuckled. "Of course. Your expertise is valuable. Market rate valuable. I've learned that lesson." As we walked out together, Blake fell into step beside us. "The committee was impressed," he noted, "especially with your community engagement metrics. That's something traditional developers struggle to quantify. Because they see it as a means to approval, not as valuable in itself," I explained. "When you genuinely involve communities in development decisions, you get better outcomes and stronger support. It's not just the right thing to do. It's smart business." Blake nodded thoughtfully. "I've been looking at my own investment portfolio differently since seeing your buildings. Started diverting some funds into community development financial institutions last month. The admission surprised me. Blake had always been the quintessential profit maximizer, focused on quarterly returns above all else." "That's unexpected," he shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Your results speak for themselves. And honestly, after attending that community dinner at your building, I realized something was missing from my own success. My luxury condo has heated floors and a doorman, but I don't know a single neighbor's name." We parted ways at the steps of City Hall, making plans to meet the following week to discuss potential collaboration. As I watched my father and brother walk toward their waiting town car, I marveled at how much had changed. The family dynamics that had seemed so immutable for decades had shifted dramatically in just 6 months. Later that evening, I received a text from my mother asking if she could stop by my apartment. When she arrived, she was carrying a small wrapped package. "I found something I thought you should have," she explained, as I made us tea in my compact kitchen. I unwrapped the package to find a framed photograph I'd never seen before. In it, 6-year-old me stood proudly beside a small structure made of blocks and cardboard, my face alight with creative joy. "Your first building design," my mother said softly. "You created a green home for everyone for your school's science fair, complete with little cardboard solar panels and a rooftop garden made of moss. You were so proud of it." I stared at the photo, memories flooding back. "I remember this project. I won first place." "You did," she confirmed. "And do you remember what you said when the judge asked why you made it?" I shook my head. "You said, because houses should help people and the earth at the same time. You were 7, Emma. 7 years old, with a vision you never lost." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. How that little girl's dream became something so important." I set the photo on my small mantle, emotion tightening my throat. "Thank you for bringing this." I've been doing a lot of thinking, she continued, about why we pushed you toward conventional success so hard. I think we were afraid. Afraid that following your passion would lead to struggle, that you'd face hardship without the safety nets we thought were important. I understand that came from a place of love, I acknowledged. But security can look different for different people. For me, it's found in meaningful work and community, not just financial assets. She nodded. I see that now. And ironically, you've created more security, for yourself and for others, by following your own path than you might have by following ours. We talked late into the evening, having the kind of honest conversation we should have had years earlier. She shared fears about her own life choices, regrets about measuring success through such a narrow lens, and genuine curiosity about my vision for the future of urban development. When she left, something had healed between us. Not completely, but significantly. The photo of my childhood self remained on the mantel, a bridge between the little girl with a dream and the woman who had made it reality. The following months brought whirlwind changes as the city initiative gained momentum. My small firm expanded, hiring local residents from our buildings as trainees in green construction and property management. Daniel and I moved into a slightly larger apartment, still in one of our buildings, still modest by my family's standards, but with enough room for a proper home office where we could spread out our increasingly complex projects. My father's new Sustainable Development Division launched with considerable investment capital, focusing on larger-scale projects that complemented rather than competed with my community-centered approach. Blake, to everyone's surprise, enrolled in a graduate certificate program in environmental sustainability to better understand the principles behind the investments he was now directing toward community development. My mother became an unexpected ally in community engagement, using her extensive social network to connect our projects with potential supporters and resources. Her garden volunteer work expanded into organizing fundraisers for green space initiatives in underserved neighborhoods across the city. On a crisp autumn morning, I stood with Daniel on the rooftop of our newest completed project, a former abandoned school transformed into affordable housing for teachers, with classrooms converted to community spaces for educational programs. Solar panels gleamed in the morning light, rainwater collection systems stood ready for the coming showers, and community garden plots were being prepared for winter plantings by residents who had moved in the previous week. "It's beautiful," Daniel murmured, his arm around my waist as we surveyed what we'd created together. "More than beautiful, it's functional," I replied. Energy bills reduced by 70% compared to conventional buildings in the area. Accessibility features that exceed code requirements. Childcare cooperative space for working parents. Beauty with purpose. "Speaking of purpose," Daniel said, turning to face me, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." My heart quickened as he reached into his pocket and dropped to one knee, holding out a small box made of reclaimed wood. Inside nestled a ring with a center stone surrounded by smaller ones. "The center stone was my grandmother's," he explained, his voice catching slightly. "The smaller stones are lab-grown diamonds. All the beauty without the environmental or ethical concerns." Tears filled my eyes as he continued. "Emma Collins, you've taught me that the truest measure of success is creating something meaningful that outlasts us, something that makes the world better for others. Will you build a life with me as my wife?" "Yes," I whispered, my voice stronger as I repeated, "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, cheers erupted from the stairwell entrance. We turned to see a group of residents, my parents Blake and several of our staff members emerging onto the rooftop, all wearing knowing smiles. "You planned this," I accused Daniel with a laugh. "Community involvement in all important decisions," he replied with a grin. "Isn't that your business model?" The impromptu celebration that followed embodied everything I valued: people from different backgrounds and life experiences sharing joy and connection, the boundaries between personal and community life blurring in the most beautiful way. My father poured champagne into compostable cups. My mother hugged the building's residents like old friends, and Blake engaged in animated conversation with our head of green construction about thermal efficiency systems. As I looked around at this unlikely gathering, My once disapproving family now integrated into the community I'd built, residents who had found security and belonging in our buildings, colleagues who shared my vision for a more sustainable urban future. I felt a profound sense of completion. Not that my work was done, but that the fragments of my life had finally aligned into a coherent whole. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself standing with my father at the edge of the rooftop garden, looking out over the city as lights twinkled on in the gathering dusk. "Your mother showed me that photo," he said, "of your first building design." I nodded, waiting. "I remember dismissing it at the time," he admitted, "thinking it was just a cute school project, not seeing the vision behind it. That was my failure, not seeing the extraordinary person you already were." "We can't change the past, Dad," I replied. "But I appreciate that you see it now." "I've been wondering," he said thoughtfully, "if you would consider establishing a scholarship or mentorship program through the Collins Foundation for young people interested in sustainable development who might otherwise be overlooked. Your path shouldn't be exceptional. It should be accessible to anyone with the vision and determination you had." The suggestion touched me deeply. I'd like that very much. 2 years later, I stood nervously backstage at the National Urban Development Conference, where I'd been invited to deliver the keynote address. Through the curtain, I could see the audience of developers, policymakers, investors, and community advocates filling the auditorium. Daniel squeezed my hand. "Ready?" I nodded, drawing strength from his presence and from the knowledge that my family sat in the front row, genuinely proud of the work I would be presenting. As I stepped onto the stage to applause, I felt not the insecurity that had plagued me in my family's presence for so many years, but a grounded confidence in my own vision and values. The podium displayed the conference theme, Redefining Success in Urban Development. 10 years ago I began. I lived in a 450-square-foot apartment that my family considered a symbol of failure. Today, I'm here to tell you why that apartment represented not failure, but the foundation of a new definition of success, one that measures prosperity not just in profit margins but in human well-being, environmental health, and community resilience. For the next hour, I shared the journey and the data. How our model had expanded to 37 properties housing over 800 families, how energy costs had decreased while property values increased, how resident health outcomes improved with green building standards, how community ownership I concluded by introducing the Collins Foster Sustainability Scholarship, which would provide education and mentorship for young people from underrepresented communities to enter the field of sustainable development. Because innovation doesn't come from doing things the way they've always been done, I explained. It comes from diverse perspectives, from challenging assumptions, from daring to imagine a different kind of success. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for me, but for the idea that success could be redefined, that development could serve people and planet alongside profit, that small beginnings could lead to transformative change. At the reception afterward, a young architecture student approached me, clutching a notebook filled with sketches. "Your work inspired me to change my focus," she said shyly. "Everyone else told me affordable housing wasn't prestigious enough, that I should design luxury towers if I wanted to succeed, but you showed there's another path." Her words affected me more deeply than the formal accolades. This was the true measure of impact, inspiring others to trust their own vision of what matters, to define success on their own terms. Later that night, Daniel and I returned to our apartment, still in one of our buildings, still modest by luxury standards, but perfect for us. On our small balcony, overlooking the community garden below where residents were gathering for an evening social, we toasted to the journey that had brought us here. "From family disappointment to keynote speaker," Daniel mused. "Quite a trajectory." "The real victory wasn't the keynote," I replied. "It was finding the courage to pursue my own vision of success, even when no one else could see it." As we sat in comfortable silence, watching the community we'd helped build flourish below us, I reflected on how thoroughly my definition of wealth had transformed. True wealth wasn't measured in square footage or luxury amenities, but in purpose and impact, in creating spaces where people could thrive, in building relationships that nurtured rather than diminished, in aligning daily work with deeper values. My tiny apartment, once mocked by my status-conscious family, had become the cornerstone of a movement. It represented Not what I lacked, but what I prioritized. A deliberate choice to invest in community over consumption, in sustainability over status, in genuine connection over superficial impressions. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been financial risks, professional skepticism, family disapproval, and countless moments of self-doubt. But by staying true to that 7-year-old girl's vision of houses that help people and the earth at the same time, I had created something more valuable than I could have imagined. Success, I had learned, isn't measured by the size of your home, but by the impact of your work, the integrity of your choices, and the community you build along the way. True wealth comes not from accumulating more than others, but from creating value that all can share. Sustainable buildings, thriving communities, environmental health, and human dignity. As for my family, our relationship had been transformed not by my financial success, though that helped them see my path more clearly, but by their willingness to expand their definition of achievement beyond the narrow metrics they had once insisted upon. In recognizing the value in my different approach, they had grown as much as I had. The photo of my childhood self with her first building design now hung in the entrance of our office, reminding everyone who entered that the most powerful visions often begin simply, with a child's understanding that our built environment should serve both people and planet, with the courage to imagine a different kind of success than the one we're taught to pursue. Looking out over the city I loved and had helped to transform, one building at a time, I felt a deep contentment. My worth had never been determined by the size of my apartment or the prestige of my address. It had always resided in the vision I carried and the communities I helped to build, a truth my family had finally come to see. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.